How you doing, guys? Jogging. I look crazy. Haven't showered. So last night, late at night, too late, I was on Blog TV with Jack, actually. I stopped in, he had this like late Burn the Midnight Oil Blog TV session, and Jack and I chatted a little bit. What it boiled down to was the approach to the gospel, ultimately the approach to a Christian channel on YouTube. And I respect Jack. Jack's an interesting guy, and he's a thoughtful guy. What I like most about Jack is I knew from the start that we don't agree on everything, but Jack has proven himself to be a man of character, and I respect that about him. Jack is cool in the sense that if he thinks something, he's going to tell you, and I happen to like candor. I like frankness. I like somebody who's going to, edify you, rebuke you if you need it. Jack's basically challenging me. He's setting his priorities on the micro, the personal, the relationships. And we had a little bit of an exchange of ideas. I mentioned to him that my approach to YouTube was a little bit more a bird's eye view. I came to YouTube, and the first thing I was exposed to is, how seductive YouTube was to the younger generation, feeding on their discontentment, feeding on their pain and hurt, packaging it up in this sort of anti-God veneer. It was a very effective format. And also YouTube gives you a little bit of a slanted sample of the populace. If you were to just drive by YouTube and click on a couple videos, you'd think that the whole world was godless, which isn't the case. But YouTube's turned into somewhat of a haven of rest for the atheist community. Jack mentioned this gives them an opportunity for an anonymous sort of venue. But nonetheless, I saw, there's hardcore pointed videos and slander and misrepresentation and so on and so forth. And it was effective, quite frankly. It was very effective. And I looked at the Christian channels, God bless them, but I wasn't impressed. And for the most part, I didn't see somebody coming back over the top with wisdom and truth. At my channel, I don't buff for anything. Many of you have had interactions with me in other social media formats, and you know that fundamentally, I don't treat people so hard-hitting in the personal, I don't necessarily present the message in the same way as I do on my channel, but, to some extent, and Jack and I, again, went back and forth on this, to some extent, I think YouTube's interesting in that sense. You're not really discussing things personally. You're discussing things in the broad sense. Now, I know that there's personal, individualized videos, but for the most part, certainly with my channel, I'm just broadcasting a very general message. Obviously, allowing room for just common sense exceptions. If I say that grass is green or something, that doesn't mean you can't find exceptions to that. But it also is okay to call grass green. YouTube is not necessarily governed by the same rules that you would apply to your personal life, your colleagues, etc. It's just not. It just doesn't strike me as the same. But nonetheless, he challenged me and said, well, this is the direction I think is most effective if the goal is sharing the message of Christ, if the goal is touching hearts and changing minds and changing lives. It's a very challenging perspective, and I've thought about that since the genesis of my channel. I've had some regrets about some decisions I've made, and different approaches I've taken, and I can't imagine most people aren't like that with their channel, but certainly because I am a Christian YouTuber, and I think that comes with an enormous amount of responsibility, an enormous amount of added consequence to mistakes. I take them very seriously. The church is like any other place. It's made up of a myriad of personalities and temperaments and skill sets, and those things play out differently. Most Christians, when they see a Christian in an aggressive format, or when they see a Christian that's not sheepish, I think they're just conditioned in a lot of ways to double back on that and feel uncomfortable with that. And I get that, because so much of Christ, so much of who he was the opposite of that. He has the turn to the other cheek persona and the gentleness and the lamb-like disposition. But I think sometimes as Christians and as the church, we don't allow enough room for the other side of Christ, which was very serious. He knew the seriousness of what he was doing. If you look at his confrontation with the Pharisees, if you look at his public debating, turning over tables, and Christ had a duality to him. I happen to be of the thinking that this time that we live in is high-stakes poker. You have the foundation of our society just being destroyed brick by brick. And I'm painfully aware of that. In a lot of ways, I wish I wasn't so aware of it. The things that are worth fighting for have very few people in the ring duking it out. And a lot of times, I think Christians see rolling over or sort of just taking unnecessary abuse in the form of slander and lies and deceit and all these different things. They see that as righteous. And in a lot of ways, I don't see that as righteous. I certainly respect individual people and their life and their representation of Christ via their life, and Jack being one of those people. But at the same time, the Lord can use people in various ways. My personality has always been very debate-oriented, very argumentative. You know, ever since I was a kid, I'm a little bit more aggressive. I'm not really one to bite my tongue, and in a lot of ways, I think that's my burden as a man trying to pursue character, is that I need to learn to temper my tongue. I need to learn to bite my tongue. But I've seen the Lord really use it. When I was in college, and there was a time and a place where, you know, truth needed to be spoken and spoken boldly. A lot of Christians sat on their hands. A lot of Christians sat on the sidelines for all the obvious reasons. They were afraid of the consequences, both socially and personally, and then their grade. And with that boldness came mistakes, came representing Christ in ways that certainly wasn't how my fellow Christians would have done it. I think this is worth talking about. I really do. I know the conversation has affected me, and I think it's a good one to have, because I think a lot of Christians have opinions on this, have thoughts on this, and I know atheists have thoughts on it. I haven't solidified my mind about it. I go back and forth, like I think anybody should if they're really seeking truth and wisdom and searching God's Word. And I just wanted to thank Jack for that. I really had a great time having that conversation with him. It was edifying, and I think that there's a lot of fruit yet to be, you know, plucked off of that tree conversationally. So thanks, Jack. That's about it for this one. Take it easy, guys. Something crawled in my mouth and bit me. No kidding. I should actually keep this as like a B-roll.